What is going on, Mo? What's happening, Mo? We out here. It's another episode of A Late Night at Dames, and we are going to explore a bit of, a regular topic for musicians. This is a topic that's about as old as music itself, but we're essentially just going to explore it via, just having this conversation, and it's going to be about whether or not purity is valuable anymore, especially in today's music, right? And so if you enjoy conversations like this, make sure you hit the like button so that way more people can see this, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so that way you can see my latest videos and all the other antics I get into. So for most people, when they're thinking about like their musical experiences and things like that, they're usually thinking of it in the sense of, how can I get the best or the most or the greatest benefit from my career, right? And oftentimes we kind of will sacrifice some of the things we would say make a person pure or make a person, righteous, sometimes integral and things like that, honorable. And I've noticed, at least in my musical career now, I was born in the 90s, I'll say, I've noticed a decline as far as the demand for a righteous musician, even though there is an immense value in a righteous musician. And so what I mean by that is, you don't necessarily need to be a sober musician to garner the influence of the public. You don't need to be a well-spoken or clean, meaning like no vulgarity or profanity in your music type of entertainer to really grasp the public eye. Now, that can be a good thing for some people, but it can also mean a bad thing for other people. So it can be a good thing in the sense that it lowers the skill cap in order to garner access to the real estate that music industry allows you to have, right? And what that means is, the things that people demand to see from their favorite musicians are easier to find, right? You can find a musician that smokes or drinks. Maybe they cuss a little, they're a little more promiscuous and things like that, or maybe they're not as good with numbers. They're a little more regular, they're a more common folk. But the demand for that being as common as it is makes it not as valuable as somebody who does none of those things, right? So a truly pure musician, a truly like highly skilled musician, a well-rounded musician for that matter, they have a lot more value in terms of what to offer, but their demand might be fewer and far between because it's just not what most people are looking for. So to relate it to something else and in another industry would be like a exotic sports car or something like a Ferrari, right? Or a Lamborghini. Very, very uh expensive, nice machines and they do great things. But the people who know the value in those machines are the people that really know the value in those machines, right? But for most people, we know of the machines, but we don't really understand fully the value of those machines. So, like, we know musicians out there that are probably like really nice people. They don't smoke, they don't drink, they don't go to none of the house parties, they don't cuss, they go to church and they just do regular things, right? We know of them. But I personally believe we don't see the complete full value in a musician like that. And that's proven to me based on the results of either those people's careers or how we treat them when they're presented to the public or, pulled to the front of the congregation, as some people would say. So I just kind of wanted to explore a bit of like how that works for musicians from what I've seen and then some of the options out there. So like let's think about like if you're starting out with your career and you want to get used to doing something like performing live, one of the things you're going to have to get used to performing live is rejection. And it's just that, some people might not be in the mood to hear what you're playing. Um, you might have a bad night, like you just played bad notes. Or in some instances, you might get heckled, right? And so going back to a previous video I made about a trapper turned rapper or turned into a puff or whatever the lyric was, you kind of have to make a decision like what kind of person are you going to be in those moments. And oftentimes those decisions are made very quickly. Like if you're on stage and someone throws a tomato at you on stage, you can start yelling at them and screaming, or you can continue on with the show, but you kind of got to make that decision seamlessly, and you got to do it in front of an audience that also wants to see you be successful too. So it's not like that one tomato speaks for everybody, whatever it is. So now you have to be aware. But all in all, the purest reaction to this is up for interpretation when you ask different people, right? So for some people, a pure reaction would be, the rawest thing that comes to your mind. So if somebody heckles you, or let's say you just have a bad show, you just, bomb, maybe you hit bad notes, you tripped and fell or something weird happens, right? You can take this and just react like how most people would up front. Like they would just either be sad, upset, frustrated, and just wear it on their face. Or you can kind of take it and reshape that feeling into something else. So there's one group of people that would say that reshaping this feeling makes it into a better feeling, a more positive feeling, or a more positive outcome. And then there's another group of people that believe that your first initial feeling, that raw initial reaction, should be the one you allow or the one that you kind of focus or control. So now, understanding this point, I think I kind of want to shape how I've been able to see people's demand for these two different reactions from celebrities and musicians alike or entertainers have changed over the years. And so, starting out, my first introduction, let's say to a celebrity musician, was DMX. And it was through a music video of his, and I can't remember the music video, but there was a bunch out already by the time I had discovered him. But the first song I heard from DMX was Stop Being Greedy. And the song Stop Being Greedy had lyrics in it that were clearly talking about greed and the consequences of being greedy. But the beat had high energy, the delivery had high energy, and also once you got past the beat and the delivery, it was a bit of a hard listen because at the time when that song came out, there wasn't much musicality in East Coast hip hop. East Coast hip hop's musicality was kind of niche. Like if you had like a jazz sample and things like that. But for the most part, being born in the 90s, the hip hop you were exposed to was more likely loops. You probably had fire loops. That was about it. And then the rest was just rap. So being intentional about getting I would say the gems from that song was a choice. But the key thing that I took from it was like, there was a lot of purity in that song, as dark as it sounded, as crazy as DMX was delivering the lyrics, and as hard of a listen it was. So like it was kind of like interesting to be able to pull all of that out of such a really, really strange sounding song. And I don't only say strange because I'm comparing that to like a song about love written by a band of a guitar player, a singer, and a drummer, you know? So it kind of reshaped how I looked at purity and like where I could spot it. Now, again, it being a choice in how I interpreted that song kind of led me to develop a skill in it to be able to just find that, right? But the average person doesn't necessarily need to do that or need to develop that skill to enjoy their favorite songs. So, for example, moving on in my life as I got older, I started to understand that my peers were attracted to different music than me. And not in the sense of like these people like rock and I like hip hop. It was in the difference of like these people who also listen to hip hop had a different taste in hip hop. So there was a difference in like horrorcore rap to gangster rap to hustler rap to street rap to R&B mixed type of rap and things like that. Party rap. There's all kinds of different stuff, right? And then eventually I started to use that same skill to kind of figure out what I was looking for in all of these different things. And it could be different from person to person, but for me what I was looking for was a bit of work ethic because I also wanted to be a musician. So I was looking for musicians who were trying to develop a sense of identity or self within their music. So not necessarily the hardest working musicians, but the ones that were definitely trying to create and innovate, right? That was definitely key. And then the next thing, of course, was just for what I believed in to be good character. So honesty, if you were gonna be raw, it was gonna be, honest. And then self-awareness was big for me. I liked when artists were able to kind of reflect or kind of criticize their own perspective and things like that. And then I would say another thing would be that I liked, along with the innovation, was that they were open to adapting. So it's not like they're a one trick pony. They just haven't tried everything yet, That was always cool to see that your favorite artist can tap into a new sound, a new genre, or just a new, skill in general. But all in all, finding a way to nurture this skill for demanding purity from my favorite artists, it started to get more and more niche. And then I realized that it doesn't necessarily mean I'm finding a specific artist for its purity. The hunger or the demand for purity really just comes from me and just, what I wanted, right? So there would be instances where some artists would fall out of music, or maybe they would fall into another industry. Maybe they're getting into film, fashion, or food, or whatever else, technology, or whatever. And it would kind of be unattractive for what I'm looking for as a musician. So, in that sense, they lose purity as far as the essence of being the musician. Now they're being more of a businessman or, an entrepreneur, but it doesn't necessarily satisfy what I'm looking for when I say a pure musician. And then there's also the righteousness aspect of it, like loyalty, and then integrity and things like that. There are some people who would use music or the music industry as a stepping stone or kind of like a milestone for what they really want to do in life. And so in a way you can kind of feel offended by it, but I don't personally feel offended, but I do kind of think that it should be presented in an upfront way that you are using music as a stepping stone, because this would be the equivalent of somebody using a, let's say, a different art form as a stepping stone only to no longer benefit that same art form, because that's the only downside to music is it really only benefits the people creating it. It doesn't really benefit the industry as a whole. So I'll give you one more parallel and then we'll circle back. Basically, if I were to create a innovative market disrupting technology, right, that almost shapes how everybody else has to do business. But unless I create like a brand new genre of music, more than likely the success you're going to get from the music industry is going to be based on your own work and merit. So you get in what you put out, or you get out of it what you put in, rather. And so it doesn't really mean much if you're going to act as if you're putting in a lot into the music industry only to take what you're getting out and then just leave with it. you know Now it's different where you have people who want to get a lot from the music industry and they're putting in work, and this is where I really have a lot of respect for like the lawyers, the managers, the directors and things like that, the publishing rights organizations, the distributors, the manufacturers and all that stuff. Like they kind of they're the people that kind of put the glue together. Like we sit on here on these mics and we do all our crazy talking and stuff, but they kind of hold it down as far as making it work, as far as pressing the T's for merch and making sure the pyrotechnician techniques work during our shows, making sure the EQs sound right when we're doing our rehearsals, making sure all these mics and guitars and cables and tuners and things like that are shipped to the right store shelves, and then the store clerks doing all the cashiering and the sales and things like that. So all those people make it work for, the few musicians to get all the money they get from these systems and things like that. So that's why it's a bit of a demand that we have to cultivate when it comes to purity. We do need people that are going to be in this music industry for like the right reasons, even though it is a benefit for them personally. I'm sure the salesman at like Guitar Center is doing that to, pay his bills. But we do want him to be able to pay his bills and feel good about it, not necessarily be a sleazeball. And this is something that I'm noticing a decline in over the years. And it's only because it's not as valuable for most people, for the common person, to be as pure. So when we think about going back to the sober musician or the musician that's, just on their P's and Q's, they don't do nothing but just, music lessons, shows, and rehearsals, and they just go home, work, and raise their family, right? That musician is not as rewarded as the musician who's clout chasing or maybe more provocative or controversial. And personally, I don't think that's by design. I think that's by choice. And the reason I come to that conclusion is because we had this conversation years ago about gangster rap, rock and roll, and then of course punk rock and all that stuff too. This conversation has come up before, but there comes a point where people are creating music on their own and publishing it on their own, or at least with the help of record labels. These record labels put it in front of us, and then we put our ears to the wall and we listen to it, and then we either nod our heads or we shake our heads, and then the record labels will respond. That's my understanding of how this works. So with that understanding, that leads me to believe that we should kind of really take our time before we nod our head or shake our head at the music we listen to. Now, that can be a tall ask for the common folk. That's why a lot of these podcasts that I started out beforehand, probably about like months ago, I was saying that we have, at least in hip hop, some of the least educated members of our fan base. And this is partly the reason. We're very quick to react to things that make us feel, but we don't really understand why. So like something as pure as like a sober musician doesn't really, it doesn't, it doesn't, it's not sexy. It doesn't make you jump in the air and want to go listen to their record if they tell you up front, yeah, I don't do any drugs, I don't party, I don't take pills, right? But if you had enjoyed a song and it was really, really, beautiful and you really felt it, and you just happened to find out that this musician was sober, it still would mean pretty much the same thing, but you may feel different about it because of how you discovered it or what their works may mean to you. So, when I talk about the demand for purity, I really mean the presentation of purity to be able to be demanded. So, a lot of the things we would say are pure when it comes to just the average person, they're not valuable because it doesn't benefit us, but it benefits us more times than not to relate to our favorite musicians. And this is kind of the point that makes most common fans fall victim to, I would say, the darker elements of the music industry. So like for example, I'll use my DMX example again. The song Stop Being Greedy, as aggressive as the song sounds when you play it, I could have easily just been pulled towards the other elements of the song, being, when you think about the music theory, the key signature, the tonality of it. And then when you think about the lyrics, the vulgarity in it, the references and things like that. There were so many things going on in that song that I could have easily gleaned from. But it was wiser and somehow lucky that I actually gleaned on the undertone of greed, right? Of understanding greed and what consequences come with greed, right? And it's done through a 3-verse rap song with a loop. As simple as that. But my ability to do that was also nurtured over the years, because that's again something that I kind of was looking forward to. So even more musicians later on in my life, I can give more examples, but that still kind of was the overarching thing that I was demanding in my music. So this leads me to my next point. If record labels put that song Stop Being Greedy by DMX on their shelves, and there's a possibility that I have the outcome that I did with that record, who's responsible? Is it me, or is it the record label, or is it the artist? Is it the record label for identifying a niche artist with, crazy sounding music or music with a good message? Or is it the artist to be able to create this thing for the record labels to exploit? Or is it the fans' responsibility, like myself in this situation, to be able to pretty much vet what I want to get from this music, right? And so this is kind of what makes it complex, because now you have a situation where the artist has the power to shape what their product is going to look like, feel like, and be like. And then they can also shape their relationship with who's going to package and market their product, which is their record label, because not all record labels are equal, and we've learned that. And then lastly, they can also not necessarily dictate, but they can almost predict how fans are going to react and communicate with what they're putting out. And this is the key thing that I think most people don't tie together. They don't kind of glue these 3 points together. It's usually polarizing between the 3 or 2 of the 3. So it's either the record labels and artists, and they're just, manipulating everybody, or it's the fans and the artists, and the fans got to just pick better artists, or it's the record labels and fans, and the artists are just being themselves and we just shouldn't judge them. So there's so many different ways that people draw combinations between these 3 issues. But I've noticed that it's the glue between the 3, being that without one of these 3 relationships understanding each other, this whole network falls apart. So if the record labels don't understand what fans want to hear, they can't tell artists what to create. And if artists don't know what record labels are looking for, they can't get employed to speak to their fan base. Basically, they won't be able to compete. And then if the fans have basically no say in what they want to hear, then we're stuck with trash music like we had in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, where we had to fight for jazz music and rock music and shit like that. So this is kind of creating a bigger issue to where we don't know what to demand for. Artists don't know what to create, and record labels don't know how to market the things that we don't know how to create and react to. So, this is where you want to have kind of a cultural shift for yourself as either a musician or a fan. And I can kind of give you an idea of what that could look like. The only reason I'm not saying record labels because record labels function more so as corporations than actual people. So now I'll explain that. Meaning like your fans can have a bad day because of a tragic event happening in their country. Your company can benefit from that bad day. So there's a little bit of a difference that happens there. And I think once you kind of understand that part of it, we can have another video about that. But once you understand that part, you can realize that okay, it's more important to focus on the fans, the artists, and the employees of record labels and distribution companies and things like that, especially like um, the executives all the way down to the workers, right? When you start to remove the human aspect of the music industry, you start to make decisions that don't necessarily benefit the real part of the music industry, which is the people, right? So let's get back to the glue. So the glue pretty much is going to be understanding that, all right, if there's going to be a relationship between the artist and the record label and their fan base, then they have to be symbiotic, meaning they have to benefit one another. And it doesn't have to be such a parasitic relationship. So what it is now is that there are artists functioning at a high level. Their title, they're employed as musicians, right? But they don't have to put out the output of musicians at the lower level. So meaning you can have a rapper or a rap group or whatever, and they will put out a project probably once a year, once every 2 years, some even longer. And the idea that is kind of told to the record labels and the fans is that there is an extremely high budget. There's a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of creativity that they need to think through and all these different obstacles ahead of them before the public gets a product, right? But compare that to the person who is, let's say, in school for music. Maybe they're not in school for music, but they're a, you know, up and coming director or band leader and things like that. Their level of output when it comes to specifically music is a lot higher and probably scrutinized at a higher level, meaning they can't miss notes because there's fewer backing tracks to assist them with. They can't miss an appointment, a gig, or a deadline because there's nothing to move around. There's not, you know, an abundance of options, right? So the accuracy is higher. But there's systems in place for why the previous artist has a little bit more breathing room. But then if we move over to the record labels can function with systems as well. Either it being their client base, working with the different stores and things like that in their network. And then it's also having the ability of artists applying to work with them, like just general word of mouth. Like people just want to, you know, put their music within their hands. And then on the other hand, you do have exclusive access because of the amount of numbers you pull. So compare that to the independent musician or the independent record label, where they have to do pretty much everything by their own dollar or out of their own pocket. The leverage is a little different. Like they have to, they can't ask for as much. They can't get the analytics without a subscription fee. They can't, just walk into a executive building and just state their name. They gotta have the resume to match it. And then now if we move over to the fans are a bit more of a free for all, because people are so unique in that how they consume music is extremely personalized. So now you'll have a situation where both the artists and the record labels have to work together to figure out what playlist you're listening to, how you're listening to your playlist, what artists are on their playlist. Do these artists match? Is this a personal playlist? Are you just adding songs just at random? How can we get any value from this to make sure we pay the bills? All that information, right? So this is where the glue starts to not look like a glue anymore, and it starts to look like wires and cables. This is because in order for the artist and fans to communicate with the record labels, they would need technology, and a lot of it. And not only would they need a lot of technology, that technology needs to gather a lot of data. And that data is going to help both the artists understand what to do and help the record labels know what to do. So when we talk about a demand for purity, there's a disconnect that's going to start to happen, because the disconnect between what fans are actually listening to versus what they actually are, I guess, marketed, are becoming farther and farther apart. And they're becoming farther and farther apart because record labels don't necessarily have to understand their fan base to a intimate level. They can be fed data, they can be fed numbers, and then they can just, have their artists move a certain way. This is where personally in my music career, I started to notice a homogenization of different artists. Right around when Lil Wayne started making like huge waves, and I don't even know if it has any connection to his record label or things like that, but it was specifically when I noticed that Lil Wayne was doing really well. A lot of rappers started sounding the same, looking the same, doing the same things, taking on the same business ventures, going the same places, drinking the same alcohol, having sex with the same women, going to the same clubs, doing the same festivals, doing the same chants, doing the same dances, and all on the same social media sites. And that was where I had to take like a macro look at the music industry and try to figure out, well, what's going on here, right? And it wasn't kind of like a shock, it was like a slow discovery, because first it was ringtones, then it was grills, then it was trying to figure out uh MySpace and social media and things like that. But all of these things that people were doing over time, then it was Instagram, then it was Facebook, then it was YouTube, now it's live streaming, now it's IRL streaming, right? But all of these things, as I started to notice, people were doing them in waves, and we didn't really have any explanation on where they were coming from. Like, we didn't really understand why we thought having your favorite song as a ringtone was a thing. Nobody really explained why we should start streaming. Someone just did it one day and it blew up, and they just, benefited. So then what really started to kick in was people's capitalistic habits. And the capitalistic habits are fine to have, but when you're trying to create a pure musician, you have to be aware of the character needed to be successful as a capitalist. So if you want to be a pure musician and you want to be successful capitalistically, what is the product that you will sell to your people that will help you be successful? Would it be music, or would it be something else? And this is where I started to question record labels. I was probably in college when I started to have this realization. I started to kind of question, okay, if I was a musician and I wanted to get started, because again, being in college, you're actually beginning your career. You're actually in your career if you're at college as a musician. But being in college, I started to kind of question, well, what is a successful musician? Does a successful musician play all the correct notes? Can they, speak three different languages? Are they athletically fit? How do they know that they're ready to just walk out the house and say that I'm a musician, right? And it was hard to come to that answer until someone told me you can't just sit in the basement and play music all day. You have to actually get out and like push it. And they weren't saying it in a sense of like criticism. They were saying it in a sense of like that is the formula. So this is kind of why you will see younger musicians, or even I would say just lower level musicians, function at a higher frequency and a higher output because of this formula right here, meaning that if you get an idea, you have to get it out because you're running out of time. You're basically running against the clock when it comes to your competition. But when it comes to the larger artists or more successful artists for the music industry, they're not against the clock, they're against a trend. They got to make sure they keep up with the trend. And it's usually nothing to do with music, unfortunately. So this has a huge effect on the demand for purity. Whereas the guy right now who's, let's say he's 35 right now, he plays guitar and he's in the southeast side of the United States. He plays guitar and he can gig every week. Like he can go to a bar and play any song, any cover song, right? And he's on point. He can play the chords, he knows the keys, he can sing, he can probably, work a crowd and things like that, right? You don't necessarily have to do that at a high level musician, but which of the two choices do people, meaning the average common folk who's just streaming music, truly demand based on the numbers? And this is where the glue starts to kind of show its ugly head again. So what I just explained was that you can have a, I'll just say a busking musician. He's a gigging musician. He can do shows. He can do a show. He's getting checks for a show, right? As a guitar player, he won't be able to do as many numbers as the larger musicians, meaning the musicians with, let's say, better systems in place, because there is a better system in place that markets the larger musician better to the fan. And so to put that into a real application, real applied example, that would be when you buy a cell phone from a technology company and you open the music app, whatever music app it is, whether it's Amazon, Apple, Spotify, Tidal, Deezer, whatever it is, right? When you open it up, you are suggested artists. Now, oftentimes these suggested artists aren't local. They're not from your county. They're not the people who graduated music school recently. They're not from the local marching band. They're not the local church ladies looking for a gig. They are the people who have the best systems in place, usually. Now, you can say bigger artists, but I just mean systems, meaning that they are on the shelves. They are when you go to the grocery store, you see the brands there. They're the ones. There's a mom and pop shop that can bake bread, but their bread is not on the shelf. And this is what I mean by the glue. So if you are a fan and you buy a cell phone and you're suggested these artists, how do you know which one is a pure artist that is using the very same systems that an impure artist would use? So to go back to my previous example of how I was introduced to hip hop was with DMX and the song Stop Being Greedy. That was on a cassette tape and it was a demo tape with only 2 tracks on it. So if you're from the 90s, you probably know specifically what tape I'm talking about, right? But the key thing to understand is That tape was a promotional tape, meaning it wasn't even a full CD. There was thought behind how that tape was made into existence and how it even got into my hands. Someone handed it to me. So it was word of mouth combined with it being a sample of a greater product, and it was manufactured by a company, shipped by that company, possibly to a store or a concert in which someone was sold that tape and then they had passed it to me. If you're just playing your guitar at a bar tonight on this Friday as you're watching this and you don't have that system set up, you lose the chance to have the same opportunity that I talked about in the beginning where I saw the purity in your crazy ass song. Simple as that. And so that's the glue that you're up against when it comes to I'm going to be a pure musician and be successful at the same time. That's the literal competition you're up against. So just like any idea, you have to be very aware of what you're going up against and how you're going to be able to really be successful and call it success and actually say I'm doing a good thing. Because I get flack for this whenever I say it, but there will be musicians with cars, with hats and lots of clothes, but they don't do any music. They don't rap, they don't sell any beats, they don't play an instrument, they don't do a thing, but they are a representation of you as a musician or you as a fan of music, your favorite artists. So that's all I have for you guys today. And that's kind of like my little rant. But if you guys enjoyed this conversation, make sure you hit the like button because your boy will be back next week at a late night at Dame's. And I am out, y'all. Peace.